Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
The fact that our 6-year economic expansion has still been called quote-unquote recovery until recently reflects the uneasy nature of how many people still feel about business in general. But is this commercial edginess we have really bona fide? Welcome back. Thank you for supporting the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy for 25 years now. I'm Chris William, and a wise economist once said that each business cycle has its own personality with particular attributes that make it unique. Why are so many still unsure about what is clearly good business? We will ask that question to start, and later on, the former chairman and CEO of the nation's largest public utility, Jim Rogers of Duke Energy.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Ted Pitts from the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, Phil Kirk of Brady Energy Services, and special guest Jim Rogers, retired chairman, president, and CEO of Duke Energy. Now, here's Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program. Phil, Ted, good to have you both back. Thank you.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
You know, I want to ask you a general question. Ted, do you get the sense among not just your constituents, but cocktail parties and side conversations, do you get the sense that people are still kind of tentative about the nature of this economic expansion?
Yeah, and it's like businesses almost are growing because they feel like this is the time that they need to be growing. And if you look at historically at when recessions come, you know, some could argue that it's time for another one. So I think there is a little tentative nature still out there, but you know, in South Carolina, we've seen so much success with Governor Haley and Secretary Hitt with new industries coming to South Carolina. There is some comfort level in that, but I would agree that there is some tentativeness that businesses still feel.
You know, as a one-off, and there's no doubt, Secretary Hitt, Governor Haley have done arguably since Carol Campbell, have done an exceptional job in economic development. Is there any concern about the nature that there's been so much concentration in the auto and aerospace industry, you know, manufacturing, certainly big, heavy-duty manufacturing. When the next cycle does come, the next down cycle, is that a concern?
No, I don't think so. I think when you look at the manufacturers that are coming to South Carolina, whether it's the tire industry or the automotive industry with the announcement of Volvo and Mercedes, you know, I think when you look at the products that they manufacture, they're products that that need to be distributed across North America. And in Volvo's case, you know, they're the first operation to set up in North America. So we think logistically, as shipment and logistics continue to be focused on goods to market, South Carolina's in a good place.
Phil, North Carolina General Assembly, you know, the rallying cry was, when's the next continuing resolution, more than it was, when are we going to get out of there? What came out of there specifically around the couple biggest issues in the state, education and transportation, that you are either disappointed or encouraged by?
Well, in transportation, I was disappointed that there's not a bond on the ballot for transportation infrastructure. However, the governor proposed one, as you know. However, they did something that governors have talked about for 40 years, and that's they did stop the taking of money out of the highway fund and putting it in the general fund. So that freed up some money. They also increased appropriations to the highway fund. So I think about $500 million new dollars will go into the road building. So they said they'd rather do that than have a bond. We do have a bond, I'm pleased to say. The governor's bond proposal for community colleges and higher education and parks and some of the zoo and so on will be on the ballot in March. In education, excuse me, finally the starting pay for teachers in their first 3 years has gone up 14% in the last 2 years. They've not done as good a job because of lack of money for the more experienced teachers. They have put more money into reading programs and increased the funding for early childhood education. So there are a lot of pluses.
But coming back to the bond issue and the postponing of the bond issue till probably spring of 2016, is that punitive for forward momentum on what North Carolina says is if it's not education, then transportation and infrastructure is the biggest issue?
Well, I think it would have been good to have both bond issues, one for roads and one for other infrastructure, on the ballot this November. But because of the legislature session going on so long and the disagreements between the House and the Senate and the governor, that made it, at least they didn't delay it a year till next November, which was the threat or the discussion. So it's good it'll be on the ballot in March. It should have been on in November, but the session just went on and on and on, which is another reason why we need a limit on how long the session can meet.
Ted, South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, yourself, your team have made job one infrastructure. House Speaker Lucas went into office as a freshman House Speaker with the idea that this was going to be done. Lo and behold, State House didn't do much on infrastructure at all. How are you hoping to get some kind of momentum around infrastructure? Is it going to be forced through business, or is there a policy that's going to be worked out?
Yeah, and you need to give credit to Speaker Lucas, because the House passed a bill with 2/3 vote that's sat over in the Senate. We're hopeful this year that it's going to happen, that it's first up in the Senate, it's set for special order. You know, Phil's talking about being disappointed and the North Carolina putting $500 million additional dollars in infrastructure. You know, in South Carolina, we'd see that as a big deal. And, you know, we've got to do something. You know, if you look at the disrepair of our roads and our bridges, and you hear CEOs like Jack Sanders with Sunoco and Pete Selleck with Michelin and Brian Newman with Honda, when you hear that conversation, that it's affecting the way South Carolina's perceived for expansions and other things, it's something that we have to address this year.
And you're right, all of those gentlemen are very credible in their arguments, but when you're winning Volvo, when you got more expansion in BMW, which is the gift that keeps on giving, when you got Boeing down there, it is hard to argue that that has been punitive to the efforts of the state to win more economic development business. So I guess the question is, outside of rhetoric, when is the tipping point at the lack of cost of infrastructure and transportation money?
I mean, I think we're there.
Yeah.
So this is the second year coming up of a 2-year legislative session. The Chamber of Commerce used to have 8 or 10 items that they put forward for the General Assembly to address. This past year we put forward 2, workforce development and infrastructure. You see folks talking about it. The Senate Republican Caucus has issued now a plan, which I think is important to get them on board on understanding that we have to do something. You know, bills passed out of Senate Finance. So we're hopeful that this year, even though it's an election year, is a year that the General Assembly is finally going to act.
Yeah, okay. And
Well, I think the legislature in North Carolina deserves a lot of credit on transportation, if I didn't make that clear a while ago. They just felt that they should do the money pay as you go rather than putting 2 bond issues on the ballot.
Phil, do you think there's a bright future for toll roads? You talk about pay as you go. I mean, it's been a very contentious issue in the Charlotte
particularly region. In the Charlotte and the Raleigh areas. We're choking on traffic. We now have over 1 million people living in Wake County, and we couldn't have built part of the infrastructure without toll roads. So I think toll roads are here to stay, and I think they'll be expanded, particularly the metropolitan areas.
Guys, thank you. Stay with us. We're going to bring our guest on in just a second. Over the next 3 weeks on this program, as we'd like to think, more stimulating and interesting dialogues. Coming up next week, he's the Senior Executive Vice President of the largest, certainly one of the largest, but by measures, the largest bank in this country. David Carroll from Wells Fargo will be our guest on our show. Also, the chairperson of the Belk Foundation, Katie Belk Morris, joins us in a couple weeks. And then about 3 weeks from now, U.S. Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina will again be our guest on this program. Our guest tonight now has been called remarkable, visionary, unpredictable, predictable, uncommon, even villain. However you tag our guest, he presided over an unprecedented time of growth, turmoil, secular change in the electric utility business. We welcome back the retired Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of Duke Energy, Jim Rogers. Mr. Chairman, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm delighted to be here.
Jim, when you look back, and you've been gone now from Duke Energy for about 2 years or so, when you look back on the last few months and the last few years, what do you think gets lost in some of the emotion around what happened, not just with the Progress Energy merger, but some of your testimony, some of the relationships with the North Carolina Public Utility Commission? Now that some of the heat is out of it, how do you reflect back on that?
When I reflect back and I look at what's happened since then, it's clear to me that the decision made to enter into this merger has been a great success. It's been a success for customers. It's been a success for investors in Duke. And it positions the company as the largest utility in the U.S., positions the company for the challenges, and there will be many, in the coming years.
What do you think the single largest hurdle for electric utilities as we've known them and as they are now to be able to get over and to be profitable and have a future?
I think you're seeing new technologies on the supply side, like solar and wind, playing an increasing role. You see new technologies that are going to lead to productivity gains in the use of electricity. So demand is going to be flattish to declining. And over the next 20 to 35 years, virtually every power plant in the country except hydro will be retired and replaced. The big question is, what will be built?
Ted?
Yeah, and Jim, let's talk about first. Clark Gillespie and Duke do a great job in South Carolina.
Thank you.
The other utilities in South Carolina partnered on new nuclear reactors, and I just want your take on kind of the future and that sort of investment. What you see that paying dividends, or if that's a problem?
I think it's very smart what SCANA's done and what South Carolina is doing in support of those two nuclear units. Nuclear is key. And all those people that are serious about climate change need to be serious about nuclear. In the U.S., 20% of the electricity comes from nuclear. That represents 64% of the carbon-free electricity. So the investment that's being made in South Carolina is going to be good for the people, but not just to the next year or 5 years, but over the next 40 years.
And to follow up on that, and I know you know a little bit about the numbers in building a nuke like that, how much does this stretch SCANA? How much does this put Santee Cooper on the edge when it comes to debt and to revenue, to getting the job done and completed? How much of a risk is that?
I think it's a huge financial challenge for them to take this on. But with support from the state legislature, support from the state commission, they'll be able to successfully bring this unit online. And you have to take a long view. Sure, the cost is great, but spreading it over 40 years or maybe 60 years, the life of this new nuclear plant, that's going to be a good benefit to the people of the state.
North Carolina has let the tax credit for solar expire. Do you have any thoughts on why they did that and what impact it's going to have?
I think they made a judgment about how competitive solar is today. The truth is the cost of solar panels has really declined. And if you think about subsidies, solar is not without subsidies, even though they eliminate it. The legislature did an important thing. They kept in place the renewable portfolio standard.
That was threatened, though, wasn't it?
They did, and it looked like they were going to freeze it where it is today, but they didn't.
I'm sorry to stop you. What's the difference between renewable portfolio standard and the solar credit?
The difference is the credit sends money back to investors who invest in solar in the state. The renewable portfolio standards puts an obligation on the utility company to purchase a certain amount of solar. But if you think about solar, there's a federal tax credit, there's a renewable portfolio standard in the state of North Carolina, and the cost is coming down of solar. So it's going to play an important role in the mix of different generation sources in the state.
What about the wind? The wind is renewable. There's just been a lawsuit filed to stop a huge wind farm in a northeastern county in North Carolina. It seems like every time something good's going to happen, somebody sues.
I think the reality about North Carolina and at Duke, while I was there, we invested $4 billion in renewables, primarily in wind. But when you look at North Carolina, the only place where the wind is robust enough to allow the economic deployment of wind turbines is on the ridge lines in the mountains. And trust me, that's never going to happen. Okay, I mean, I have a house up there, I'll be fighting it. With respect to on the coast, people are not going to allow wind turbines to be built there. And so those are the only two places where the wind justifies the investment.
What do you see, the EPA and the federal government and President Obama and kind of here at the end of his last term continue to push down mandates? I guess they've issued something on ozone, I believe, yesterday or day before yesterday. And what do you see those mandates doing? I hear manufacturers really concerned about the cost associated with those mandates.
I think the cost will be significant on the ozone regulations, but the Clean Power Plan, which affects utilities, what they've effectively done is put a nail in the coffin of coal in this country. They put a cap on the burning of natural gas because they're requiring a certain amount of renewables to be built by 2030. And they've structured the rule so it's biased against nuclear. So states like North and South Carolina that have deployed nuclear in the past don't get credit for it when the government mandates what the reductions have to be.
So doesn't that create a utility to look, and I know it's very hard to do in this very regulated environment, but Jim, I guess the question is, how would you change the DNA of a utility company to include the distributed generation, those folks that want to do solar and sell it back and so on and so forth?
I think it's critical for a utility company to give customers choice. If you want to build on your roof solar, then we should enable it. We should facilitate it. The big issue is net metering. And so the question is, at what price should we buy excess generation from your solar panels? That's really where the debate is. And we need to find a place where it's fair to other customers on the system, as well as fair to you and the solar suppliers.
So that would, I'm sorry to dominate this, guys, and I promise. So that would be the price you would buy from a private house. Would that be a wholesale price? And who does it? What country does it well? Is there somebody out there that has a great model?
They don't. And actually, there's a lot of debate across this country, and actually debate in Germany and Denmark and all these other places with respect to it. The reality is, it's not the wholesale price in most states. It's the retail price that a lot of utilities are required to pay. The way to think about it is, if utilities buying it from you, it should be at the wholesale price. That is more logical from my standpoint. But again, a lot of people try to take net metering as a way to incent investment in solar. And the fact of the matter is, utility scale solar is far more affordable than solar on the rooftop. And in states with high prices like California, New York, and New Jersey, solar competes, but it doesn't compete as well here except at utility scale.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize for not calling you professor a while ago. How about telling us about your teaching career and your writing career?
Sure, thank you very much for asking. This is kind of my reinvention. I don't use the other R word when I talk about what I do, but I've had the great opportunity to be a Rubenstein Fellow at Duke University, and there I've had a chance to teach a course in graduate school on renewables and world poverty, which links very well with the book that I just published on August the 25th. It's called Lighting the World, and it's focused on the 1 out of 6 people on this planet that have no access to electricity. To me, it was stunning to know that 1.2 billion people don't have access to electricity. They don't have the benefits like accelerating economic development, better health care, better education, more efficient farming. And for people in these rural areas, that's critical because 49% of them are either farmers are in the agriculture sector.
You know, Jim, that's not, that seems hardly fair that you have a teaching role at Duke University. Now, Chapel Hill, that would be open-minded if you were over there.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just had to bring that up. I didn't know about the connection. Ted, go ahead.
You know, when we talk about, we talk about information technology, and, in South Carolina, we talk about the way to move our rural schools up is through technology. And then you talk about, 1 in 6 people in this world don't have electricity to even plug in an electronic piece of equipment. What sort of impact do you think providing energy and power to the rest of the world, what sort of impact do you think that has globally?
It's going to lift people out of poverty. It's going to give people an opportunity for the economies. 600 million of these people are in sub-Saharan Africa. 300 million are in India. It's going to really stimulate the growth of those economies if they can lift them out. They get better health care, they get better education, more efficient farming. All of that is going to translate into greater markets for U.S. companies, greater opportunities for people around the world. So I think it's a great thing if we can find a way to do that.
Do you get a sense that most of your contemporaries or former contemporaries, most of the utility industries in this country, would want to, in other words, I think what I'm asking here, Jim, is are we more in need of utility reform, energy reform now than even we were 5 years ago?
The regulatory and business model that worked so well in the 20th century to allow us to provide universal access to every home and business in the U.S., that model in the 21st century is going to have to change. It's going to change because we have new technologies like solar on the rooftop that's increasingly more economic. It's going to change because we have new technologies that are going to drive down the demand for electricity. So I believe that state legislatures, state regulatory commissions, as well as utilities should be grappling with a new way to move forward in the 21st century.
Will energy be an issue in the presidential campaign next year?
I think it will be. If you look at the new regulations, this administration talks a lot about all of the above, but nothing they do supports an all-above strategy. And their bias is really more to renewables. What's made our system so resilient, so robust at handling problems, is that we generate electricity using coal and gas and nuclear and renewables. So one of the keys going forward is to keep all of them in the play, because we don't know what the price will be or the availability will be. And so we need to be very mindful of that going forward.
The environmental community almost sees all fossil fuels as bad in some cases. And you look at gas and I guess it emits half the carbon that coal does, and the price of gas is obviously down right now. I think it's important that we do look at that mix. What do you see, the candidates this time in the presidential race, do you see them having the ability to understand that?
There's been no evidence that they understand much.
Right.
Is that a bipartisan comment?
That's a bipartisan comment. I mean,
so.
trust me. I've been watching the debates and I've been listening to the speakers, and I'm saying, who's really in touch with the American people? Who understands where we are and where we need to go? Who understands how we create jobs? Governments don't create jobs, businesses create jobs. I don't know anybody that's really talking about that in a clear and consistent way.
We have about a minute left, less than a minute left. Jim, what would you tell the executives at Volkswagen, given the crisis management that they're in now and given your history in that area?
I think the first thing, and they've made a step in that direction of being very candid about the problem that they face. They need to embrace it, and they need to work hard to solve it. It's going to be expensive for them before it's over, but they need to protect the Volkswagen brand. And the only way the brand survives this crisis, if they demonstrate leadership on resolution of the issues.
Okay. I wish we had more time to talk about coal ash, more time to talk about branding, but thank you. Hope you'll come back again, will you?
I'd love to.
Okay. Professor, thank you. Good to see you again, Jim.
I like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Phil, good to have you back on the program.
Thank
Been
you.
too long.
Thank you.
Ted, always welcome, of course, and thanks. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you for watching us. Next week on the program, David Carroll from Wells Fargo, also Katie Belk Morris from the Belk Foundation in 2 weeks. If you have any questions or comments, carolinabusinessreview.org. Go to that website. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Have a nice weekend. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.